Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wytpod. My name is Harshit, and I'm the Director of Business Alliances at Wytlabs. We're a digital agency specializing in SaaS and e-commerce SEO. I've got Nicole with me today. She's the VP of Marketing at Bonusly, a brilliant employee recognition and engagement software. A big welcome to you, Nicole. So happy to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Right. Now, Nicole, you basically led your marketing efforts at several high profile companies as well prior to this, right? Including Cisco, Matterport, Port. So what are some of the key lessons from these experiences that has really shaped your approach to marketing today?
I think as we were just briefly chatting, I think what really gets me excited is the challenge. And I think across all the different companies, there's a similarity around how teams are trying to come together and help identify what's going to work. And I think what makes me love what I do is I'm really passionate about the relationships with sales and marketing and how you can drive growth together as one organization.
All right. Now, let's talk a bit on the Bonusly front as well. I would love to understand what are some of the core USPs that sets Bonusly apart from competitor out there in the market. It's an extremely crowded space, to be honest.
Yeah, what I think really sets Bonusly apart is around the fact that we're thinking about how we can help the companies and how we can help the employees, right? And how we can actually think about how rewards and recognition, how that can impact positive behaviors, right? And then when you add that with enablement and some of the new manager enablement tools that we've been rolling out, you can see how that actually can drive impact and performance, right? And so right now what's happening with companies is they really want to understand how they can help drive behaviors in a very positive way and how employees are also wanting that insight and wanting that recognition and wanting to know that feedback. And so it becomes this great mix of being able to identify how you can recognize folks, how you can drive credible feedback, how you can actually help enable your managers, and then you ultimately can help drive business impact and growth.
Gotcha. And tell me, Nicole, when it comes to your lead gen, specifically your demand gen efforts, which channels have been specifically really working for you?
I think the standard channels that people really understand and like to dive into, like SEO and organic, that's a big channel. Obviously, we focus on. I
Yeah.
also would say we've been leading really heavily into our webinar program because it's about for us when you think about your audience, how are you going to get in front of them? And a lot of the webinars that we've been doing have been in partnerships with some of the HR communities because we want to be where they're at. Instead of always creating something new, sometimes it's about knowing where they're at and being part of that and being able to deliver content that's inspiring to them so they are part of that community, but they're also then coming and wanting to hear more about what you have to say. So
Right.
I think more and more that's going to be happening as it relates to different types of communities and different types of, I'd say, like Slack channels and other types of ways that people are collaborating right now. I think it's even more important to understand where your people are at and go there. It's not necessarily that you have to always create something on your own. Sometimes it's better to be where they're at and
Yeah,
leverage that
sure.
channel.
Yeah, makes sense. And Nicole, what I've seen is a lot of marketers struggle when it comes to attributing, basically, like specifically the webinar efforts. What your process looks like for that?
It's a very well said statement because I think, first of all, I think attribution is only ever going to give you 70% of the information.
Right.
Attribution is never going to be perfect. It's just not possible. And I know I've had this conversation a lot with leadership teams over my career around why is it not just math? I'm like, I wish it was, but it's not. And it's because humans aren't math.
Yeah.
And so things like with webinars, it's about what's your goal with the webinar, right? And understanding how many of them are you bringing into your database? How many of those folks are net new? How many of those folks are you nurturing over a period of time? And understanding that sometimes the webinar is about educating them and then they're going to come back. And so I think right now people are very much like one and done. And they
Uh-huh.
look at their last channel and they're like, oh, great, this is what's working. It's my last channel. I'm like, okay, it's your last channel, but what other things did this person experience?
Yeah.
And it's very unlikely that somebody is going to go do one thing and then be ready to buy. That's just not human behavior. And I think sometimes people need to take the science or the math that comes with attribution and actually apply some common sense. But I think when they're playing that finance game, you see this and you see this. That's what works. I'm like, that's not. Can we just have some common sense around it?
No, I agree. And in fact, you mentioned a point, right? I've seen a lot of companies make this mistake of turning an educational webinar into a demo session, especially in the SaaS niche. So that is, what are your top do's and don'ts when it comes to webinars? Any tips?
Yeah, I would say really focus on what content is going to resonate and what gets people excited. And I will tell you, sometimes your first or second go isn't going to be the answer. But once you find something that works, like we had webinars that started at 100 people. And then once we figured out the right content, it started blowing up to 3,000 people every time we held the webinar. So then we started leveraging that and knowing that it was really resonating. And that was for us was around manager enablement. Like we knew it, but think about what's happening in the economy right now. You can almost know that managers are struggling. They have more work on them than ever before. And what tools are out there to help them be successful? Not many, right? And they're taking on more responsibility, but they're also the path for leadership to understand if what's working or not, or what teams are working on, right? So it's almost leaning into what's actually happening out there and providing insights and feedback and helping. And I think then you could see the content, you can see how the content can really make an impact. And then your audience starts to grow and you can see excitement around it.
Yeah. And how do you go about the topic research altogether? Do you take input from your audience, like what they would want to hear about? Or is it like some different process that you have in place?
I do listening to our customers, hearing from our customers one of the things that they care about.
Yeah.
In our case, we were finding out that our customers were already using Bonusly's information to actually do some of this work in manager enablement, but they were doing it on their own. And I'm like, we were all like, wait a minute, if they're already doing this, why aren't we leaning more into that? So honestly, right now, leaning into your customers, regardless of what company you're at, is the most important thing because they're going to tell you how your product is being used and give you ideas of how they're using it in ways that you haven't even thought about.
Mhm. Gotcha. And anything around community marketing, I think that's pretty big, especially in the space that you're in, the HR community. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually participate in a lot of communities. And as I was saying earlier, it's really important to think about where they're at versus where you want them to be. And so when you think about the different communities they're at, like SHRM and HRCI, those are huge HR communities that we need to be part of. And how do you get part of that is by joining it and doing webinars within it, going to their events, but also just developing those relationships with them too. And of course, we want to have some of our own programs as well. But if you can do that as great partnerships, even if we can find some HR partners or some of our customer partners, those are ways to help develop that relationship.
Gotcha.
I was going to say relationships right now are another key thing that really matter in co-marketing and partnerships because again, everyone's looking for how to optimize things, right? And you need to optimize the things that really help drive that collaboration in that community.
No, makes sense. All right. Now, you have successfully scaled teams from 20 million to 130 plus millions. What are some of the core strategies and principles that you follow to drive such substantial growth?
So I think when I call myself a revenue marketer, the reason why I say that is because I'm very focused on how marketing impacts the business overall. Now, I'm not saying that some of the other elements of marketing aren't as important. They very much are. Like obviously I believe in brand and some of the other aspects that really need to happen because honestly that enables a lot of the revenue stuff that needs to happen. They don't happen by itself, right? But the reason why I call myself more of a revenue person is because I love that partnership with sales, obviously, and how that works. But I also think about it in terms of my approach. I don't believe in leads and MQLs. I don't even measure them. I don't even care. What I think about is how do I actually drive opportunity? And I optimize all of my channels towards opportunity, which is basically pipeline. I also think it's important as a revenue marketer to have the inside sales team. So MDRs and BDRs report to me. And the reason around that is understanding what's working or not. And those fast signals. Most MDRs and BDRs eventually want to become salespeople. So knowing that and having them learn on the marketing side and help provide impact. It's a way of helping them become stronger salespeople when they go through their career, because they're also then learning around how to better partner with marketing. And so I think a lot of times SDRs and MDRs sit within the sales organization, but then there's always that weird dichotomy between marketing and sales, right? And so my passion is around how do you make that go away? How I'm currently compensated is based on pipeline and revenue. I don't take a salary the same way that other marketing people do, because if I'm compensated and inspired just like sales, now there's no like question of, oh, she's caring about her numbers and not about mine. I'm like, nope, I care about your numbers just as much as you do,
Yeah.
because that's also tied to my targets and my growth. And I think there's very few marketing people who will go out there and actually take a number. And that's why I wrote an article about that around I believe if you want to be a marketing leader in today's age, you got to take a number and you got to be open to it.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And I appreciate the approach as well. To be honest, like, there are very few marketers who would actually accept that revenue targets and stuff like that. It's mainly like other KPIs around marketing specifically. I'll make you reach to this level, blah, 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 the exposure and the visibility, all of those things. But it's brilliant that you do it. All right. Now I'm going to be a little bit biased and talk about SEO. So, right. So, how do you integrate SEO into your broader marketing strategy at Bonusly, and what tactics have been like really fruitful for you when it comes to boosting your online organic presence on so?
One thing that we had to really think about was, what's our goal for SEO? Because there's different goals that you can have. You can have goals that's just around driving volume, right? You can drive volume to your site, but if you drive volume to their site and then they leave or they don't convert on that page and they go somewhere within your site, then I'm not quite sure SEO volume is the right answer. You also can focus on SEO as it ties to, again, what I love, conversion towards growth or pipeline, right?
Yeah.
And so I tend to really lean in more on the SEO that's going to drive conversion versus then growth, right? I usually start there. And the reason why I start there is because then I know what's working and I know what to optimize. So that's learning at how many people are searching on certain terms that are relevant to your content, looking at your content, looking at what your company goals are, and how do you optimize that. When you're talking about volume, sometimes you're talking about going after terms that are relevant to your company, but they're not the highest in converting terms.
Yeah,
In terms of
transactional in nature. Yeah.
yeah, of nature, right? And so that's why I first wanted to start this off with, because there'll be a lot of founders out there. They'll be like, oh, but I want all this traffic and I want to use organic to drive all this traffic. And I remember at one company I worked for, they wanted this term that for us to use. And if I say the term, it'll be very obvious what company I'm talking about. So I'm not going to use the term. But if I say, but the term was so generic that anybody could be that,
Yeah.
right? And so I'm like, yeah, I could put a lot of effort on that. But if I put effort on that, what's going to happen is they're going to just come to our site and bounce. And then that's going to hurt us overall. It's going to hurt our overall domain. And I think that's one thing that people need to understand is, what's your domain strategy? How do people look at your site? And as things are happening, obviously, with email and email domains, like, you have to actually be protective of your site and you're protective of your domain. So I think sometimes my approach sometimes can be controversial, because I think, again, a lot of founders are out there going after traffic and going after volume, because in their head, they're like, listen, it's free. Why can't I get any more people here? But I'm like, but if you don't follow that all the way through with, okay, fine, you got more traffic. How long are they sitting on that page? And are they actually converting? Then that's why I tend to optimize towards growth. I might optimize toward, and it could be PLG growth, it could be signups, right? And what percentage of those signups actually convert. It doesn't necessarily always have to be sales as in pipeline, but it's about what's your target and what's your goal.
Yeah.
And so I think SEO has many facets to it. And I think you need to align for the company what's that right thing before you go in and you dive. Because I feel like I look at SEO as a house, and there's many walls and there's many layers and then there's a roof. And what are your goals? And then how do you design that house based on what you're trying to accomplish?
Let's put this way, right? Fine. Like just working on the right keyword is such a crucial thing. I also know some of the founders who actually take pride on ranking for the generic keywords, which is definitely driving tons of traffic, say just asset or asset management, right? But they have a software which is around it's a asset management software. And yeah, but they're just getting tons and tons of traffic for those generic keywords, not doing any good, to be honest, right? Yeah.
And
Then
that's why
people,
I think over time, like some of the Google algorithms and stuff, I think over time, they recognize that. And once people go to your site and start bouncing, guess what? You start getting ranked lower. And then
yeah,
guess what? Then we start looking at how we can change the content to get higher. It's a game, right?
yeah,
So if you focus on what converts, then you're getting the right people
yeah.
versus just going after the volume of the traffic. So again, that's my point of view. I've had, like I said, there's been plenty of debate and discussions on that. You just said, I think founders who have started off by using organic 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 years ago, it's changed, it's evolved, but they got so excited about some of their quick wins
Yeah.
that they may not understand the definition around all of that.
I agree. I agree. All right. Now, given your experience with analytics and performance matrix, how do you utilize basically data to inform and optimize your marketing strategies?
So sorry, my computer, it's because my battery keeps telling me it's low. And I'm like, I'm plugged in. How can it be low? Sorry. So I was going to say is how I utilize, I know you're going to edit this. Can you just repeat the question so that way I can do it?
Yeah, I mean, because you're pretty experienced with analytics and performance matrix, right? So, how do you utilize data to inform and basically optimize your marketing strategies?
So from a paid perspective, and obviously I'm just giving you an example of one piece, is I'm looking at, again, what is actually looking at what's converting and being able to understand where I can test things and change my spend based on the information that's coming in. The first thing I did, for example, at Matterport is everything was optimized towards MQLs and leads, right? And as I said earlier on, I don't believe in MQLs and leads. I believe in tying everything to pipeline. So just by doing that in the beginning, we spent an exorbitant amount of money just going after trying to maximize leads and MQLs as much as we could. By utilizing the data, we were then able to identify and optimize towards what was converting. And I was able to drop that spend in half because then I was only focusing on the things that convert, right? And so my then paid strategy was about how do I break off from there and understanding what's working and then test into that. But I immediately was able to get our budget under control just by focusing on the things that actually work. Now, again, what I said earlier, that's 70% of it, right? I don't believe you can ever just look at the data and not actually apply common sense to it and actually test. Because I can tell you, for example, I'll give an example of somebody was like, we want to look at our ICP and if our ideal customer profile, and let's say it's between 500 to 2,000 employees. If that's our ideal profile, then why am I looking at paid and why am I looking at the audience size of 5,000 and below versus just 2,000 below? I'm going to pay more for a little bit higher because why? Because some of the companies that I want to talk to are in that higher space.
Yeah.
And just because they list that they're a 2,000 person company, if I don't actually think about some of these other places at a higher amount, I'm going to miss them. So the conversion might be a little bit lower there, but it's worth it because I can see the performance around it and I can see the audience that's coming in and how that maps to our overall ICP, right? So I think data is there to inform you to make common sense decisions and test. That's what the data is for. And I find one thing I also think is really important when we're talking about data is I work a lot with revenue ops and business analyst teams, and I have across my career. And a lot of time they'll just spit out tons of data. Oh, have you seen this? And I'm like, I almost want to stop them and say, okay, what's the question that you're trying to solve? So if you just come back and spit out all the data at me, then I would be like, okay, what does this mean and why? And what does that impact? And I said, so Where I've spent a lot of time with the revenue ops and the marketing ops teams that I've run is let's identify how we want to run the business. And let's look at the data that we're putting together and how that helps us make decisions around the business. Because what I've found is sometimes they just provide you so much data that you actually start making changes so quickly that actually negatively impact your performance. So it's really important when you're looking at the data to not just look at the data and go. It's about looking at the data and trying to understand how that data maps to what you're trying to accomplish, and does it influence it one way or the other?
That's very well put. All right. Now, with your background in global marketing leadership, what are some of the key strategies that you have in place for managing and align diverse marketing team across different regions?
I've run both like global teams, both where the team was actually in those countries. I've done it where they've been more centralized. And it's about I think what's an interesting strategy and approach is around when is it better to stay local versus when is it better to be global? And then when you actually apply funds around it. And I can tell you when I was at Matterport, we started off very global, right? But we didn't really have, or when I got there, it was very global, but it really wasn't a global strategy with local nuances to it. And so when I joined, I actually brought it back in first. And again, I'm not saying I brought it back in terms of the people. I brought the strategy back into what we were about. And I did that on purpose because I could see the messaging and how we were communicating around who we were was so different in you could go somewhere else in the country and you'd be like, what are you talking about? And so by bringing it in closer first, we were then able to get alignment around who we are. And then as we started rolling it out and identifying the local things that we wanted to do, it became that much stronger and drove a bigger impact. So sometimes I think it's important to bring it back in before you go back out. And that's exactly what we did. And when I joined Matterport, for example, they had never hit their numbers and they were a global team, but they weren't hitting their numbers from a marketing perspective or from a sales perspective. And so I'm like, nicely say, this isn't working. So let's try something different. And that was where I was like, okay, let's bring it back in. Let's centralize it. Let's get us all aligned at where we're going. And then when EMEA and we had Asia Pac and we had folks in Australia, it was around how do we think about the local nuances that are needed that sit on top of that global strategy?
Gotcha. And coming back to Bonusly here, what are the specific strategies that you have in place post-purchase for your customers for the retention side of things specifically? What strategies have been doing really wonders for you? And yeah, how's the churn at Bonusly?
I think what really gets people excited about Bonusly is the fact that once you come in, you're now part of our family, right? And we have a customer success team that are experts and love what they do, right? And so they'll help you set up your instance and I help identify your goals. It's not just a here, one and done, and okay, now get it up and running. I think our customer success team, because they're so invested in making sure that they understand what the customer is looking for, then they help them on board, right? It's an onboarding process. We've got a great support team that will reach out to them and really provide that support as needed as well. And so I think we definitely have a philosophy around how you really take care of the customers. We also have customer programs, and these customer programs around how they can be more involved in where Bonusly is going. And I can tell you from my time at Cisco, when I led the customer advisory board, working with the leadership team, the thing that I learned the most about those advisory boards, and again, these were the people that made up 80% of Cisco's overall revenue that we were meeting with globally around the world. And the common thing that I heard from all of them is they all had a point of view. They all wanted to provide us feedback. And the thing that I tried to encourage, it was John Chambers at the time and that leadership team, that if we took one or two of their ideas in these advisory boards and leaned into it, even if it was just one or two, right? What that did is it made them feel like they were part of where we were going,
Gotcha.
right? And so you impact them by giving them things that really matter to them around their business, but they impact you and they impact our roadmap. around where we're going. And so it's creating that sense of community. And I feel like Bonusly is on that journey as well, is how do you become part of that of a community where it's a two-way street.
Now, how do you ensure that the marketing efforts are aligned specifically? I think I pretty much covered it around revenue. So let's skip this question, right? I would love to understand now what specific marketing technologies or tools you're particularly excited about or you're planning to bring in within your marketing stack at Bonusly.
I think there's some tools out there that are trying to get there. They're not there yet, I will say. And so obviously there's the Marketos and the HubSpots of the world that we're all using. And there's a lot of stuff around AI that's happening and about optimization and personalization. But I feel like they're both very separate tools right now. I think Gong's starting to investigate more in that on the sales side. Adobe just came out with a new with a kind of a product that would sit on top of their kind of CRM automation efforts and Experience Cloud. I think that space is going to get even tighter over the years, probably in the next year or so. And I think that's what gets me a little bit excited is around how we can tie some of the personalization as
Mhm.
relates. I'm also a big believer though that we need to be leaning into AI. Don't get me wrong, we absolutely need to be leaning into AI.
For sure.
But I also believe we need to be leaning into human, and that's never gonna go away. And I think that's where people, as they're leaning into the AI, there's still this humanness of, okay, if we're personalizing content, you need to actually read the content that's being put together, and you need to
Yeah.
actually think about how that connects. What I think AI can do for a lot of the work that we're doing right now is it can get us 80 to 90% there. And so we can move quicker, but it doesn't replace that human. And so I think that's the thing that I'm interested in is how do we get quicker, better, and optimized more? And I think companies are starting to figure that out. So I don't know. I see some stuff in Adobe that I think is interesting. I see some stuff in Gong that's interesting. It's going to be an interesting space, put it
Yeah,
that way.
sure. And you mentioned it right. AI with human in loop is the sweet spot. People should leverage it for sure. For the scalability, for the betterment, everything, right? All right. Now your recent work included shifting focus to ad tech performance marketing, specifically at work. What was the major challenge at that particular point of time? And for this shift, basically, and what insights you can basically share?
Sure. So one thing is, as we mentioned earlier, I think my career has been across different industries, and that's because I just really love the challenge, right? I really love the challenge of understanding the industry and then how marketing can help come in and help drive an impact, and that impact typically being growth, right? And so when I joined Whirl, at that point, it was very much around CTV, right? So that's online television, right? And that's having people come to your and they pay a subscription fee. And what Whirl did was about how do you do the infrastructure around that. So it managed the distribution, it managed the ads placements around that, and it then connected you with Tubi and Freevee and all these other channels where people could actually watch the
Yeah.
content, right? So when I got there, Whirl and AppLovin were having conversations around an acquisition, and AppLovin is really more of a, I would say, an ad tech industry that's really focusing on mobile, right? And really what Whirl was going to be was that CTV arm around that. And so what I really needed to lean into is understanding that this is going to be the bridge for AppLovin to be able to start talking in this CTV space, right? Where it's historically been known more in this mobile environment, right? And so leaning into that and leaning into what did that mean? And what did that mean for the customers? And starting to go out and start targeting new customers. And that's where we launched a product called Content Discovery. And Content Discovery was about how do you find the content that is most going to resonate with the folks who are online, who are you're online with. And then actually what we learned is by having it be both a mobile and a CTV effort, you've got a much higher performance in terms of your overall impact and conversion. So again, it's about understanding the product and understanding the impact that it could have, and then finding the people who are going to care about that the most, right? And so Whirl went through quite a transition as it was going through the acquisition into AppLovin, and then how to find its place within that company.
All right. And how do you basically balance the need for innovative marketing tactics with the necessity of staying aligned with your strategic business goals?
So I always think it's important to constantly test. I think one thing I struggle is when there isn't this appetite to try new channels and try to dive in, because as a growth marketer or a revenue marketer, I'm constantly thinking about how I'm going to hit that number, right? And I'm somebody who actually lay awake at night and dream about it in terms of like how I'm going to approach that. So I think what can really be hard for a revenue person like myself is when you cut off that ability to innovate. And so for me, I always try to keep an arm in some of those new things that are coming out there and how like AI, like just even testing AI assisted SDRs. Does that work? Does it not? And I wanted to test it. I wanted to lean into that. I was one of the first people that dived into qualified and drift when that first came out. Like
Hmm.
I want to be in the new technologies and testing and learning from it. Why? Because it's going to give me ideas around what's actually working and converting.
Hmm.
Right. Now, I'm not saying we do 10 at the same time. It's usually going to be like one or two. And it's usually going to be a percentage of the budget that I feel comfortable with that's not going to impact our growth goals.
Yeah.
But there's got to be an appetite to do that because otherwise you can start going flat. And I can tell you, like when I was at Matterport, one thing I really wanted to test was this what's concept of Matterport Academy. So while I was there, we had all of this great content all over the company and our product in our YouTube environment. We didn't have this like centralized place around what was called Matterport Academy. And so partnering with the team, we created this new Matterport Academy space and it became this amazing organic channel. And then it actually started becoming a customer referral channel, right? And that was all based on a concept of how we could centralize and organize content better for our customers and actually for our sales team in terms of how to understand the product and speak to it better. But it ended up taking off and being something much more rich, right? And I think that only came about because we wanted to try something new.
Yeah. That makes sense. And definitely, just like you mentioned, this is pretty much any mature SaaS would do. Have a good library, have certification around it. I've seen HubSpot do this particular strategy so brilliantly well. People go crazy like when it comes to just their may I say SEO certification or anything that they particularly launch. So yeah, but it does really work, and yeah, if you do it right, becomes good success. All right, now given your experience with the customer experience program, how do you incorporate customer feedback into your marketing strategies, specifically at Bonusly?
So, one thing I love about my career is that it started about customers. That's where it started,
Yeah.
right? So, I spent 13 years at Cisco. And while I was there, I led the customer advocacy programs and Cisco advisory boards around the world that I talked about a little bit earlier. And again, it taught me about how leveraging them and partnering with them was inspiring, right? And so, for me, I don't think anybody really wants to hear a company tell their story.
Mm.
The customers need to tell the story. The customers, in terms of the successes that they have, is what makes Bonusly or Cisco or Adobe or Matterport, any of the companies that I worked at. It's they're better at telling the story than we are. And I think sometimes people ask me one of the things that I'm most proud of, and some of the things I'm most proud of is the relationships that I've made with some of those customers. And I think about again my time at Cisco, I'm still connected with all of those folks.
Mm.
And it's been, I don't know, 8 years since I was at Cisco, right?
Yeah.
But I was there for 13 years and I helped build this program focusing on our customers and partners around the world. And there was a huge education part of it around with Networking Academy and Worldwide Education. And you just develop relationships, right? And I think that's where it goes back to when I think about a brand. I can't tell you how many people think a brand is the colors and the brand is what you look like. No. And some people ask Nicole, why don't you want to lead the brand? I'll usually bring in a design person or sometimes the product or an organization will work on the design. I said, because to me, the brand, yes, the look and feel matters. Don't get me wrong, it matters. But the thing that matters the most of your brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah.
That's what your brand is. It's not a color. It's not a logo. It's what people say about you, your company, when you're not there.
That's deep.
I know. I know I'm being silly, but yeah. And that's why I think customers matter to me.
You just gave me my past statement.
Your what statement?
My past statement for this podcast. All right, now looking ahead, Nicole, what do you believe will be the biggest challenge or set of challenges when it comes to your SEO at Bonusly for the next few years? And how are you preparing your team for it?
So I think that I'm going to answer that in two ways, if you don't mind, a little bit selfishly. I'd
Yeah.
say the biggest challenge that's happening right now is it's really hard for companies to hit their targets right now, because I just think what's happening in the economy in the world, people are afraid to buy and spend money. And it's much harder to be in all of our jobs right now. It is. And I think you got to own that. We all just need to know that and take a deep breath and work together on that.
Yeah.
When it comes to SEO, it goes back to understanding that the landscape is going to consistently change. Google's going to roll out new algorithms, and you need to be aware of that. And AI is coming in hard, and people are not always going to Google anymore and trying to start looking at and how to find things. There's a lot of voice activated search that's actually getting pretty interesting as well too, right? And I think SEO is always going to evolve. And I think people who want to be experts in digital domains, they need to stay with it. And they also need to be open to, I shouldn't giggle when I say this, they also should be open to the debate, because I think it's a good debate to have. And to me, I would just ground it on, okay, what's our goal? Can we agree on our goal? Because it goes back to when you're having that debate, I could create a ton of pages and again, go after a bunch of key terms, and I could drive volume through the roof on our site. But if none of that converts to they go to that page and they bounce, or they go to that page and they don't go to another page, who cares?
Yeah.
And so I think it's about understanding what the goals are. And that's how I try to really align my team. I think another thing that I've tried to do with my team is understand that teams all have strengths, and every person has a strength. And so one of the things that I've learned when trying to put teams together is helping people understand what their strength is and leaning into it. And I think talking with them about what their goals are. And so I think for my teams, it's always about, what are your goals and how do I help you get there? And I think one thing I think it's hard right now is because everybody is so performance and impact driven. A lot of performance conversation are around, did you get there? Did you get there? Did you get there? Did you get there? And my head goes to, it's not about did you get there? Did you get there? Did you get there? It's, did we agree on what those targets are going to be? And did we agree on how you're going to get there? And did I do my part to help you get there? And I think that's what people are demanding right now. I think employees, it's almost changing the performance landscape, right? Because I think in the past that you do these performance reviews, 6 months, 1 year, you get ratings. I think people are now saying, no, we need to do this together. We need to agree on what our goals are, and we need to agree on how to get there. And yeah, I'll do my part, but you need to do your part too.
Yeah, I agree. All right, Nicole, we're coming to an end now, and I would love to have a quick rapid fire with you now.
Oh,
Yeah.
rapid fire. All right, I'm ready.
Okay. What's one marketing cliche you wish would disappear?
It's a true cliche, which is everybody thinks they know how to do marketing.
I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I feel like I think that could rub people the wrong way. So maybe that's not the one that I think I should lead with. Can we not do that one?
Let's keep it. It's a good bold statement that you make.
Oh, shoot.
I changed it. Okay, let's do it again. What's one market?
I don't think I want that as my brand personally. Can we not go there? Yeah.
All right, let's pick another question. What's the weirdest thing you have done in the name of marketing?
The weirdest thing that I have done. So it's probably one of my favorite stories is back when I was at Cisco, there was all these folks that came in from different places around the world. And this is when In and Out took off, right? And so again, Cisco's highest revenue generating customers.
Okay.
And these are like CEOs from around the world of the biggest companies you can think of. And they were so excited about In and Out Burger because they'd never seen it before, right? And so as we were just leaving this really fancy place that we were just at, we're driving by and there was this In and Out. And like I'm on the bus with all of these folks and they're like, "Oh my God, can we go? Can we go?" And all the events logistics people around me were like, "No, like how would we do that? That doesn't make sense how we would go." And I'm like, "Look how happy they are. Let's do this." So I literally got up and I walked down the aisle and I got everybody's order and I called it ahead and then I jumped off the bus and I went and got all the food and I came back in. And to this day, some of them still call me the In and Out girl. And they're so grateful for that. I also remember this funny thing. Again, I was like 28 years old. So, I was still pretty young in my career. I remember leaving a voicemail for my boss. And I just said, because the In and Out Burger place was like literally like 5 blocks from the Cisco office. And I remember calling and leaving her a voicemail. I said, "You're going to get this expense report for a few $1,000s from In and Out Burger. I just wanted to be clear. That's not me pigging out. That's me taking this. But I just wanted to give you a heads up before you see this huge expense at In and Out Burger." The good news is that she totally laughed, but it's an experience that still cracks me up because you think about these people, right? And they're making billions of money, but they were so excited to do something that was just so simple, right? And everybody else was like, "No." And I was like, "Let's do it. Why not?" And I just found a way to do it. And I think those people just greatly appreciate it. And I had to work with them for I was doing the advisory boards for 10 years. So they became family and they remembered that and they appreciated that. They appreciated the fact that I gave them one of that experience. So my point around it is it might be a real strange thing to do, but I actually feel like those are the things that create experiences with people.
Yeah. All right. Now, what's the most unexpected lesson you have learned from a failed campaign?
I think from a failed campaign, I think one thing that I learned was understanding that it's okay to pivot halfway through. And I think sometimes in my earlier career, I could be very focused. No, this is what we said we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But as data and insights were coming in, I realized that sometimes you need to pivot. And I think that's what got me so excited to join the startup world. I spent 13 years at Cisco, so I had this really great foundational knowledge, right? But then as I started jumping into some of these other companies, I learned that the pivot is almost just as important. And I think being open to that. Whereas when you come from structure, and you can't get more structured than a Cisco in these big matrix environments. And so part of the reason why I left Cisco is because I wanted to go learn how to do these things. And I wanted to put myself in situations. And it was an opportunity for me to take that structure and realize it's a great foundation. And I will never, ever say anything other than I'm grateful for that foundation. But it also can sometimes limit you in terms of your thoughts and your ideas when you're in that structure. And so that's why I've spent the last 5 or 6 years in the startup space really trying to hone in on what's different and what's unique and how you can learn from that and how it's okay to pivot. And also, just to be clear, when's the right time to pivot versus when it's not the right time to pivot, right? And I think maybe I was growing up, right? I jokingly say that's how you grow up. You have to learn from the lessons.
Yeah. All right. Now, on a personal level, if you could use only one social media channel for the rest of your life, which would it be?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one.
Don't say LinkedIn.
No, because that's more, I would not say LinkedIn. I would say my son's not going to like this one, but I actually really have been loving Instagram a lot more lately. And the reason why, I know it's a little bit older, the reason why I like it so much is because the way it's connected me with my nieces and nephew.
Hmm.
right? And so you said you're asking on a personal level. My nephew just went to college and he's a freshman, and I'm curious to see how things are going. And so I can actually see him posting on his friends and showing his new college, but I'm not there. He's in New York and I'm in California. I don't know. So I think there's something to that, that it's more, again, it's human, but it's also, what's the right word? It's innocent. When I say innocent, it's just nice. And I think I miss that a little bit about our social channels. I feel like our social channels go a little bit to the extreme. Whereas I just really, the thing that I like about the Instagram thing, and this example here is, I like being able to communicate with my nieces just through images and just be able to see how they're doing. And I recognize what they're posting is what they want me to see. I'm not dumb. I get that. But at the same point, it just makes me smile to see how they're doing.
That's good. All right. Now coming to a very last question. What's your last Gen AI prompt or your last Google search?
Oh gosh. So I've been working on how do I communicate some of the things that I really believe as it relates to revenue and performance.
Mhm.
And so I typically like to use AI as a way for me to brainstorm my thoughts and have it help me with how I'm articulating it. Because I find how I articulate it can go really into the weeds,
Mhm.
right? And so I sometimes need the AI to help bring me back,
Yeah.
right? And help restructure it. So I'm really loving using it as a way to be a writer with me at the same time and have it make suggestions, right? And so that's how I've been using it a lot lately.
Which Gen AI platform do you prefer? Like, is it ChatGPT?
I've used ChatGPT, but even I think like Gemini and some of the other tools that are out there are pretty simple. But I like it as a way, as if I'm having like you on the phone with me as I'm writing, because I think that's what makes my content better, as I'm partnering with somebody. It's like I'm trying to say this, but it's not coming across the way that I want it to say. And so
Yeah.
that's a lot around how I use it in my day to day. It's around how do I help it? How does it help me become a better communicator?
In fact, I use it a lot. I'm a big fan of Gen AI. So yeah, for the content, just one of the use cases that you just said. And also like to compose my emails, to be honest. I end up being too bold often. And yeah, I just put on a prompt just on any of the Gen AI platforms. Just make it humble.
Oh,
Stuff.
that's cute. I like that. Make it
Yeah,
humble.
yeah. So yeah. All right. This was fun conversation, Nicole. I really appreciate you taking time out for this and sharing your wonderful experiences with our audience. Truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.